Bio Enzymes Part I will provide some fundamental background on chemical reactions as energy transformations. The sum total of chemical reactions in an organism is known as metabolism. All chemical reactions in living things are accelerated by enzymes. And the essential idea is enzymes control the metabolism of the cell. Here is the outline of topics for the 3 parts of the enzyme unit. Use this slide to find your way to the section you need. This movie is focused here. The energy source for almost all living things begins with solar energy. Energy from the sun is absorbed by organisms that photosynthesize in a transformation of energy, solar radiant energy to chemical energy. Consumers then feed and feed on each other as energy is moved through the food chain, transformed from chemical energy to chemical energy from one trophic level to another. Solar energy is very important to living organisms. Solar energy warms the Earth. The Earth's average temperature of 15 degrees C makes Earth a habitable environment for living organisms. Solar energy drives photosynthesis. The glucose formed through photosynthesis provides the chemical energy required of all organisms. The chemical energy produced by plants has not magically appeared. Absorbed solar energy has been transformed to chemical energy. The amount of energy absorbed is the amount that we find in the bonds of glucose. And this is the first law of thermodynamics. Energy can be transformed, but not created or destroyed. So here is the summary equation for photosynthesis, a metabolic process comprised of numerous chemical reactions, all enzyme-catalyzed. The chemical reactions in photosynthesis are part of the entire metabolism of a plant cell. And the first law of thermodynamics is right in front of you. Solar energy is transformed into the chemical energy of glucose. But energy has only been transformed, not created or destroyed. The first law of thermodynamics is a law about the conservation of energy. The energy absorbed is the energy in glucose, 1 for 1. So here are the first 2 IB syllabus statements of importance. State that ecosystems rely on a supply of energy from sunlight. State that light energy is converted to chemical energy in carbon compounds by photosynthesis. The chemical energy of glucose made by plants through photosynthesis is necessary for the plant's energy needs and that of all the organisms in a food web. Consumers, such as this leopard, obtain their energy and carbon by eating other organisms. Energy is moved through the food chain as chemical energy. So, in summary, solar energy flows into the system, energy moves through the system as chemical energy, and energy leaves the system as heat, a less ordered form of energy. So solar energy flows into the system, energy moves through the system in chemical form, and leaves the system as heat. As organisms spend energy for their needs, energy leaves the system as heat, a less ordered form of energy. And this brings us to the second law of thermodynamics. Whenever energy is transformed, some of it always proceeds to a less useful form, a less ordered form. Whenever energy is transformed, entropy, disorder, increases. So here are the next 2 IB syllabus statements describe how chemical energy in carbon compounds flows through food chains by means of feeding. That's pretty straightforward. State that energy is released from carbon compounds by respiration and is used in living organisms and converted to heat. Consumers get their energy in carbon from what they eat. The chemical energy in the food moves through the food chain as chemical energy to provide for the energy needs of all organisms, all the way to the top of food chains. Then all organisms everywhere respire as a means to transform chemical energy for the purposes of motion or active transport or building molecules. In turn, according to the second law of thermodynamics, there is a transfer of heat, a less ordered form of energy, out of the system. Here is the summary equation for respiration. Respiration is comprised of numerous chemical reactions, all of which are enzyme-catalyzed. The chemical reactions of respiration are central to metabolism. In this slide, I ask if you can find the laws of thermodynamics. The first law is reasonably clear. All of the energy, the food consumed by the animal, can be found in the feces, new mass of the animal, or used in cell respiration. The first law is the law of energy conservation. Now, the second law is not quite as evident, but the energy used in cell respiration is being transformed. Some of the energy is transformed to a less ordered form, a transfer of heat out of the system. Heat is a less usable form of energy, and as such, is unavailable to organisms for further use. Here are two IB syllabus statements, and hopefully you are gaining control of the big picture on energy transformation and the laws of thermodynamics. State that living organisms cannot convert heat to other forms of energy. State that heat is lost from ecosystems. This diagram displays an energy pyramid in an ecosystem. Each bar represents a different feeding level: producers, the plants, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and third-level consumers. The width of each bar represents the total quantity of energy available at that level, available to the next level up. Notice the progressive decline in available energy with each feeding level through the food chain. The energy pyramid results from the second law of thermodynamics. As organisms at each feeding level transform energy, some energy proceeds to a less useful form. Thus, energy is transferred out of the system as heat. There is less and less available energy through a food chain due to the second law of thermodynamics. This is a mesocosm, a model of the Earth. Solar energy arrives from the sun, moves through the system in chemical form, and departs the system as heat. Sunlight is the primary and continuous energy source for almost all communities. Now, nutrients, molecules that provide energy and matter to living things, are different. Nutrients cycle within a system, and nutrients are finite and limited. As you think about this image, make the distinction between energy flow and inorganic nutrient cycling. There is a continuous, albeit variable, supply of energy in the form of sunlight, but the supply of nutrients in an ecosystem is finite and limited. Now we step into a new section of this movie, and here are the IB syllabus statements. First, metabolism. It's the web of all enzyme-catalyzed reactions in a cell or organism. Then anabolism, the synthesis of complex molecules from simpler molecules, including the formation of macromolecules from monomers. And anabolism is an energy storing process. Lastly, catabolism, the breakdown of complex molecules into simpler molecules, including the hydrolysis of macromolecules into monomers. Catabolism is an energy-releasing process. Spend time to gain control of these definitions. Having studied molecular biology earlier in this course, these definitions should not feel so difficult. So while I've defined metabolism previously in this movie, the terms catabolism and anabolism may be new. Their definitions are on the previous slide. Catabolic reactions are reactions where large molecules are broken into small ones with the release of energy. Catabolic reactions are known as exergonic reactions. Hydrolysis reactions would be examples. Anabolic reactions are where small molecules are built into larger molecules, and it involves energy storage. Anabolic reactions are endergonic, energy-storing reactions. Condensation synthesis reactions would be examples of anabolic or endergonic reactions. In this graph, the y-axis shows the quantity of free energy in the reactants going into a reaction, and the x-axis displays the progression of the reaction with the free energy of products displayed to the right. Exergonic reactions, catabolic reactions, involve reactants with high quantities of free energy, energy that's available to do work, and they end with products that have low quantities of free energy as energy is released or the energy is used to do work in the cell. For example, sugars like glucose have high free energy, high amounts of energy contained in the chemical bonds of the molecule. As cell respiration starts with glucose, and as the respiration process proceeds, Glucose is broken into carbon dioxide and water as the products with low free energy. The difference in the free energy of the reactants and the products is the change in free energy seen here. The breakdown of a molecule with high free energy could proceed spontaneously, but in living organisms, that would cause problems. So in order to initiate a chemical reaction, the reactants require a slight input of energy to bring instability to their bonds. And that brings us to the next syllabus statement. And the syllabus statement is define activation energy, and it is defined as the minimum energy required to start a chemical reaction. For example, the molecules on the end of a match head have high amounts of free energy contained within their bonds. But the bonds do not spontaneously break, releasing energy. Instead, the match requires an activation energy provided when someone strikes the match head against a rough surface. The second statement applies to HL Bio students only. Explain how an enzyme serves to lower the activation energy of a reaction. Stay tuned. Here is the second free energy graph that I've shown you, showing free energy on the y-axis over the progress of the reaction on the x. This is an exergonic reaction, as the reactants have high free energy and the products have low free energy. Energy has been released to do cell work. But notice the activation energy required to bring the reactants to an unstable position, the transition state, such that the reaction then can proceed to product. This is the activation energy. All reactions in living systems have an activation energy. The change in free energy is here, and we designate the change in free energy, known as delta G, as negative, less than zero, because the system has given up free energy as an exergonic reaction. In this graph, we have free energy on the y-axis and progress of the reaction on the x. You can see the reaction curve for a reaction without an enzyme, and then the reaction curve for a reaction with an enzyme. Enzymes lower the activation energy required for a reaction to proceed. This is what enzymes do to accelerate chemical reactions. Enzymes lower the activation energy. Without the enzyme, the high activation energy restricts the rate of the reaction, but the progression of the reaction with an enzyme is accelerated with a lower activation energy. Again, free energy on the y-axis, progression of reaction on the x. This curve represents the course of a reaction without an enzyme. The large activation energy inhibits the rate of reaction. This curve represents the course of a reaction with an enzyme. The smaller or lower activation energy increases the rate of the reaction. As you read graphs like this, be sure to note the difference between activation energy and free energy change of the reaction. This is the free energy available to do cell work. Also notice that enzymes do not alter or influence the free energy change of the reaction. This diagram shows the free energy change for an endergonic reaction. The quantity of free energy in the reactants is less than the free energy in the products. Endergonic reactions require an input of external energy in order to have a storage of free energy. The change in free energy is here designated as positive delta G because endergonic reactions, anabolic reactions, store energy. But all reactions in living systems have an activation energy, including endergonic reactions. So the free energy curve looks like this. Endergonic reactions require an external source of energy in order to push the reaction uphill to the products. This is the activation energy. This is the free energy change in the cell. This is the energy available to the cell following the reaction, the energy available to the cell for cell work. So in this free energy diagram of an endergonic reaction, we can see the energetics without an enzyme and with an enzyme. Enzymes lower the activation energy of reactions, resulting in an accelerated rate of reaction. Notice that the enzyme does not alter or influence the free energy change of the reaction. Hopefully you feel comfortable with these IB syllabus statements, define activation energy, and then explain how an enzyme serves to lower the activation energy. Now, with respect to the second syllabus statement, I'll be filling in some gaps in part 2 of this series, when we look specifically at the relationship of the enzyme with the molecules that are either being put together in a synthesis reaction or the molecule that's being broken in a hydrolysis reaction. And when we look at that relationship between enzyme and substrate, we'll better understand the explanation of how enzymes lower activation energy. As I approach the end of this movie, I would like to fill some gaps, provide some additional big picture ideas, and do a quick review. Photosynthesis results in the production of glucose, which is the energy molecule respired by all living things, including plants, to provide energy for cell needs. Photosynthesis is an anabolic process, while respiration is catabolic or exergonic. Cells respire glucose, as seen here, in order to provide the energy necessary to build ATP from smaller molecules, ADP, and inorganic phosphate. The synthesis of ATP is endergonic, and you should remember that endergonic reactions require an external source of energy, so that there is a storage of energy in the ATP. That external source comes from respiration. The energy in glucose is transformed to the energy in ATP. Now, heat is released whenever respiration occurs, according to the second law of thermodynamics. Then, ATP is broken in an exergonic reaction to drive cell work, such as motion or condensation synthesis or the active transport of molecules across cell membranes. As an exergonic reaction, heat is released, the second law of thermodynamics. Now, ATP is broken, and ADP and P, as the products of the exergonic reaction, have low free energy. ATP will be reformed from an input of energy through the exergonic process of cell respiration. Maybe you can see now that endergonic reactions are coupled to exergonic reactions. In this diagram of a cell, we can see the input of solar energy for photosynthesis as an anabolic endergonic reaction, where solar energy is the external energy source for the endergonic reaction. This is a transformation of energy, solar to chemical. Energy is stored in the bonds of glucose. Now, glucose is then respired in an exergonic reaction to drive the endergonic making of ATP. This is a transformation of energy, chemical energy to chemical energy. ATP is spent in an exergonic reaction to do cell work, movement, active transport, anabolism. There is an overall transformation of high quality energy, solar, chemical, to a low quality energy, heat, and heat is transferred out of the system. Here's an image of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. This is a very important energy molecule in the cell, as the breakdown of ATP drives cell work, motion, anabolism, and active transport. The bonds among the phosphate groups are easily broken because the negatively charged phosphate groups repel each other. These easily broken bonds are what make ATP such an important energy molecule within the cell. Remember that once ATP is broken doing cell work, it's put back together again through cell respiration. And the last IB syllabus statement of the movie, a fairly simple statement, is state that metabolic pathways consist of chains and cycles of enzyme-catalyzed reactions. I've mentioned through the course of this movie that both photosynthesis and respiration are in fact numerous chemical reactions, and that each has a summary equation. As such, you should imagine the entire process of either respiration or photosynthesis as a metabolic pathway, including both chains of reactions where we have one intermediate after another, or cycles of reactions where reactions begin and end with the same molecule. In this free energy diagram of an exergonic reaction, can you identify the reaction with the enzyme and the one without? Can you identify the activation energy of either reaction with the enzyme, without the enzyme? Can you identify the change in the free energy for the reaction? In this free energy diagram of an endergonic reaction, can you identify the free energy value of the reactants, the products? Can you identify the activation energy of the reaction? Can you identify the change in free energy of the reaction? And could you draw the reaction curve if an enzyme were present? And for our last image of the movie, we have an image that provides some detail on the magnitude of cell metabolism. Cells are reaction vessels with dozens and dozens and dozens of reactions going on all the time. As the body temperature of organisms is usually relatively cool, enzymes accelerate all chemical reactions. And the essential idea is that enzymes control the metabolism of a cell. And that brings us to the end of IB Bio Enzymes Part I.